Includas Publishing. Join us for the 3rd annual Includas Book Party, Pages Under Investigation, 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time on social media, December 3rd, 2021. Includas Book Party, Pages Under Investigation, Debunking Disability Stereotypes in Literature.
Hello to our Includas supporters. I'm here to debunk some books that include harmful disability stereotypes. The first book I'm going to talk about is 5 Feet Apart by Rachael Lippincott, which was published in 2018 and is a contemporary YA romance. The book is about two cystic fibrosis patients who have to stay 6 feet apart from each other for fear of contracting an illness. This book is harmful because it's what's considered sicklit, which is usually, in regards to YA literature, is about characters who are disabled in some way, and it deals with their illness and with the prospect of dying, and it's really harmful because it plays on people's emotions, and it depicts all disability as something that's going to eventually end in death. And it also plays into inspiration porn because it makes able-bodied people feel better about themselves and their lives by reading about people who have it much, quote-unquote, worse than them, which is just not true. Some other aspects of this book that are harmful is that one of the side characters, his name is Poe, who is a friend of the main character, Stella, also has cystic fibrosis, and he ends up dying. And to me, that felt like it was just done to play on the reader's emotions and to make them feel sad rather than anything else, which is extremely harmful to the disabled community because it makes able-bodied people see us, first of all, as disposable, and second of all, as fragile, which is just not true. The main character, Stella, often performs positivity for her friends so that they won't be upset because of the issues that come with her cystic fibrosis. And I think why it's important to stay positive, it's not necessarily, people with disabilities aren't always positive. There's going to be times where we're upset because of things that happen with our disability, and there's going to be times when we're upset because of just normal life things, and that's okay. And performing positivity all the time just isn't realistic, and it may make able-bodied people see disabled people in a way that when they're not being positive, then they're capitally bad, which can obviously have bad implications down the line. The next book is A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeleine. It's technically a middle grade novel, and it is viewed as fantasy or science fiction. The problem with this book is that there is a character who comes in through the end of the book who I also believe is present in the rest of the series. And his name is Matthew Maddox, and he had an accident that led him to being in a wheelchair. Now, he's described as a crippled body with useless legs, like a shriveled child's, which is obviously ableist because the word cripple is ableist. We don't want to use that when talking about disabled people. That's why we like the word disabled. And just the way they describe him is so negative. And the more negative connotations that disability is ascribed to, the more that able-bodied people are going to see disabled people as those negative descriptions, rather than what they actually are, which is a human being who just has different needs than they do. The other ableist moment that I found in it was Matthew's father owns the store, and he doesn't want Matthew to be a partner in the store, which sort of leads to infantilization, and which means that basically he doesn't believe that Matthew can actually be a successful partner in the store because of his disability, because of the fact that he can't use his legs. And he's kind of making him out to be sort of like a baby, even though he obviously has a brilliant mind and is able to think about anything and to write these amazing stories. And I think obviously he'd be able to manage a store, so that part was also really ableist. There's tons of disabled people who manage stores who have all types of disabilities. The next book I want to talk about is Roll With It, which is a contemporary middle grade book by author Jamie Sumner, which came out in 2019. So Roll With It is about a girl with cerebral palsy. And she has some internalized ableism on her end. So, for example, she might say something like, "Oh, I'm so mad my legs don't work. I can't do anything." And that's a example of internalized ableism. So the main character is in middle school, and she ends up moving with her mom to help out her grandparents, who are elderly and are starting to need some help in their old age. And the main character's mom ends up trying to force Ellie, who's the main character, to have an aide at school, even though Ellie claims she does not need an aide and that she's capable of doing things herself. And her mom ends up forcing her to have this aide, which I think was pretty ableist, because we should believe disabled people when they tell us they do or do not need help. There's also a moment during Christmas when Ellie goes to church with her family, and there is a little girl at church, and her grandpa thinks that little girl is Ellie, except that she's able to walk. And he gets all teary-eyed and happy. And I think that's pretty traumatic, especially for someone who has never been able to walk, and someone who's in a wheelchair. And it's also kind of inspiration point, because we put so much value on being able to walk, and obviously her family wishes she could walk, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So I feel like that was a moment that was really traumatic to Ellie, and it was something that shouldn't have been in the book, even though her grandpa does have some memory issues, which makes sense. But it's just stereotypical and traumatic for her. The next book I'm going to talk about is My Brother Charlie, which is a picture book by Holly Robinson Peete and Brian Elizabeth Peete that came out in 2010. And is about a girl and her twin brother named Charlie, and Charlie has autism. This book just kind of takes the cake in terms of harmful stereotypes. First of all, there's puzzle piece imagery, which is reminiscent of Autism Speaks, which is a horrible organization who claims they're dedicated to people with autism, but they are not. So that's something that should not be in this book or any book ever. Charlie's sister goes on about how Charlie's brain works in a special way. And the term special is pretty problematic when it comes to talking about disability. We see words like special needs and special education, but it's not really special, it's just different. Disabled people's needs aren't special. They're just different than what people consider normal. I'm saying that they're special just adds unnecessary emphasis to that. There's also a whole page about, his sister talks about how hard it is being Charlie's sister, which is just gross ableism. It's not hard to to be a family member of someone with a disability. It's just different. Charlie's sister also wants to fix him. She talks about fixing him, which is pure rhetoric. And why it's nice to talk about curing someone who has a disability, we're not taking into consideration that everyone might not want to be cured. People want to live with their disabilities every day, and we all know what it's like to have a disability. And being cured would change a lot of things for us, and it might not be as good of a solution as people think. And by curing someone, talking about cure rhetoric, we're saying that they don't really exist in the plane of quote unquote normal that we think they do. They exist outside that normal box, and that means that anything that exists outside that box is bad, and that's just not true. There's also a quote about how autism doesn't have Charlie, which is just one of those quotes that I've seen multiple times. Insert disability here, it doesn't have this person, which is just not true. Our disabilities are part of us. We are part of our disabilities, and it makes us who we are, and a lot of us are proud of our disabilities and how we've been able to adapt and make the world our own. This next book is Me Before You by Jojo Moyes, which came out in 2012. This is one of the more popular books that has been talked about in terms of ableism, stereotypes, and disability, and I want to talk about it now. So the whole premise of this book is ableist. One of the main characters is Will, who was in an unfortunate accident and is paralyzed, has a spinal cord injury, and he hates his life, he hates living, he hates everything about it. His mom ends up hiring a caregiver, Louisa, who finds herself falling for Will. And a lot of the language referred to him as ableist. People call him stuck in a wheelchair, which isn't true. We're not stuck in a wheelchair. Our wheelchairs are our mobility devices. It's the way we get around. It's how we have freedom and independence. We're not stuck in it. They're actually very useful, as are other types of mobility aids. So the premise of this book is that at the end he commits assisted suicide. And I think that's a tricky subject because it's obviously something that some disabled people want, and disabled people should have that autonomy. But this book makes it look like it's the only thing that someone with a disability can do, when in reality there's so many different ways to live a full life when you're disabled. There's a lot of talk about Will that doesn't involve him, especially when it comes to Louisa planning the trips for him, going out of her way to make him happy so that he won't commit suicide. And that's just, again, pretty infantilizing. He a couple times says, like, you never even asked me what I wanted. Like, he's being dehumanized and treated as less than he is, which is probably where some of his unhappiness is stemming from. The last book is Our Chemical Hearts by Krystal Sutherland, which came out in 2016, and it is a YA contemporary, kind of a romance, kind of not. There are two characters, Grace and Henry, and Grace shows up in Henry's class one day, and his first impression of her is that she's gross and that she looks like a heroin junkie, which is incredibly wrong on so many levels. And she was in an accident and had injured her leg, and now she basically changed a lot in terms of how she presented herself. And the fact that the first thing he's saying is that she's gross, and we're looking, in regards to her disability, her temporary disability, it implies that disability is gross and negative when it's not. And he describes her, as he gets to know her, he describes her, that part of her soul was cracked. And that just sort of illustrates a broken and timid image of her. And, you know, it's because of her disability, obviously. So a part of her was cracked and broken. And that aligns disability with this broken and timid image, that people who are disabled are broken and they're timid and they just have to sit at home with their disability and so be it, which isn't true. People who are disabled are not broken. They are whole, and they are whole because of their disability. There's some rhetoric about how before she is in this accident, that she was pretty, but because she became disabled, now she's ugly. From her previous friends, from peers at school, and just that rhetoric is just so wrong. Just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're ugly. No one is ugly, disability or not. I also noticed that when Henry and Grace are together, all he wants to do is talk about what happened to her. And that sort of places more focus on her disability than on her. People are just so interested in what happened to make you this way. And they're so intrigued, but because it's not what they're used to. But therefore, they're ignoring the person that's underneath all of that. And also constantly talking about how you became disabled is really traumatic. This book is kind of a love story, but it's also kind of not. They get together a little bit and then they break up, but she has a lot of issues, Grace. So they end up not staying together. But at a couple points in time, she makes this note that he isn't in love with the disabled version of Grace. He's in love with the non-disabled version of Grace, the person she was before she became disabled, which is also a comment on the manic pixie dream girl kind of theme, but it also says something about disability, that an able-bodied person shouldn't fall in love with a disabled person because they're not as good as a non-disabled person, and they're not worthy of love, which is just not true. So, thank you for listening to these debunks. Let us know in the comments what you thought of these books, if you've read them, and if you have any other books you want to talk about that include disability representation that is helpful. Thanks for watching. Bye!
Thank you for watching. You can visit Includas Press at includas.com.